Hi, I'm David Levine. I'm co-chair of Science Writers in New York. My guest tonight is Jerome Barkow. He's an anthropologist, and he's at the Department of Emeritus Professor of Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at Dalhousie University, which is in Canada. And for tonight's purposes, he's director of the board of Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence, METI International, which conducts scientific research and educational programs, as well as the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
I'm a member of the board of directors, but I'm definitely not the director.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
Dr. Barkow has analyzed the impact of Islam on Hausa women in West Africa, to why the Bugis of Indonesia could have sophisticated knowledge of cuisine, but no knowledge of childhood nutrition, and also how Nigeria's middle belt came to crash. So you have a few comments to make, and then I'll start asking questions. For those in the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A box, which is below. Q&A, not chat, and we'll get to those. Okay, thank you.
Well, listening to that summary, it's the career of somebody who lacks Sitzfleisch and starts doing something else every few years. But at the moment, I'm trying to stick to this one thing. Now, I wear a bunch of hats. Today, I'm an anthropologist. And I want to go back in time to over 50 years, my first field work among Hausa people in what is now Kaduna State in northern Nigeria. And I built myself a compound there. And one day my assistant comes in and says, you want to see this? Okay. And what I saw was a young man swimming. The only problem was there's no place to swim in that town. And then it was the dry season. What he was doing was making swimming motions in dust, in thick, heavy dust. And there was a much older man kneeling by him who appeared to be trying to appease him or plead with him, and who looked very anxious. And I didn't know what on earth I was seeing, but everybody else knew what it was. I mean, clearly he's making swimming motions. He has to have been possessed, or well, in Hausa you'd say mounted, the way you mount a horse. Must have been possessed by Serkin Rafi, I think that's what it was, Serkin Kogi, the king, the ruler of the stream or the river. And that's why, of course, you swim when you're in the spirit. Spirit is a better translation in this case, I think, spirit of the river. Everybody knew what was going on. They had a cultural framework. I didn't. I'd had only what I'd read, and what I'd read is that it was mostly women who were members of the Spirit Possession Association. But for the local people, as they explained to me, the spirit loved the man and therefore mounted him, or he mounted it. It's the same thing in Hausa. And the idea is to try to placate the spirit and give the spirit what the spirit wants, and each spirit has particular things that they need. And then maybe the spirit will eventually go away. But we explained the inexplicable in terms of cultural frameworks. This wasn't my culture. I didn't have a framework to understand it. After I'd read up and thought about it and studied up on it, okay, now I understood it. As an anthropologist looks on this as, this is a marginal role here, that women who don't have children, which is a tremendous failure, young men who can't manage to get together to bride wealth in order to have a wife, that's another tremendous failure. They're marginal, and this is a role that marginal people can take. Okay, now I understand it as an anthropologist. But psychiatrists who have looked at this kind of spirit possession describe it as a form of dissociation something vaguely akin to multiple personality disorder. The point is that there are inexplicable events in every society. I think that's probably part of the human experience. It's some things we just don't understand. But our cultures serve to give us explanations. And what is a satisfying explanation to us is what our culture has taught. Now, for us, until pretty recently, and maybe to a considerable extent right now, the inexplicable is to be or was to be understood in terms of a god or gods, in terms of spirits, in terms of saints, in terms of ghosts. We live in a very complex multicultural society. So you have a choice of culturally constructed explanations, accounts of the inexplicable. Today, of course, our dominant framework is the scientific technological. So when we see something that seems to make no sense at all, we, especially we who are overly educated, we want a technological, scientific frame to explain it. Now, this interesting government report, mostly it was looking at 144 cases of people connected with aviation, largely pilots, and phenomena that they had seen. And of course, they definitely expected scientific explanations. And the problem was that they had trouble getting convincing scientific explanations. That June report, it's not about UFOs. That would get you into arguments there. What it's about is unidentified aerial phenomena. UFO sounds like, talking about tales of abduction. And these were more like, hey, every time we fly over here, we see these three objects going faster than they can, and then they change course in a way that's utterly impossible, and then they vanish. That's the kind of thing that they're seeing.
So I read the report, and you expect government reports to be long. This was 9 pages. And so this is a report by the Pentagon. On June 25th, they released it to Congress. And it doesn't say what the 144 sightings from 2004 to 2021 are. And the report presents no convincing evidence that the alien spacecraft have been spotted, encouraging the government to collect better data on these unidentified aerial objects.
Well, it comes to no conclusions at all, except more research is needed, which makes it, I'm a retired academic. This is what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, that's how you keep yourself in business. I think in this case, though, this is very heavily redacted. And I'd really love to see the unexpurgated account, but I'm not going to see it. I don't have that kind of security clearance.
Well, they did write that the unidentified aerial phenomena pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. Safety concerns primarily center on aviators contending with an increasing cluttered air domain. UAPs would also represent a national security challenge if they are foreign adversary collection platforms and provide evidence a potential adversary has developed either a breakthrough or disruptive technology. And they specifically mentioned Russia or China. So
they're giving a scientific account.
Right.
They're giving an account that we, since we participate in this culture, they and we find satisfying, find plausible. But here I'm wearing my anthropologist hat. And it doesn't mean that their explanation has anything to do with what's being observed. It has more to do with we need a scientific explanation, and that our adversaries may be more advanced than we are, or maybe a section of the government exists that's been doing things that we can't talk about over here. But there's no evidence that any of this is true, particularly.
So why don't you speak a little bit about what METI does and what your goals are to communicate, I guess, with aliens?
Well, METI does a lot of science education and well, it's a lot broader than the name Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence sounds, but at the core is producing messages, and those messages are in the process right now with being produced that with some luck will be sent out. The idea is that this is a vast universe, and it seems absurd to believe that we're the only high-tech intelligent species around. So let's talk to them and see what they have to say to us. Some people think we should be asking them for help. I don't know about that. I think what I think is interesting is personally now, I'm not speaking for the organization, but personally, I think that people behave better when there are witnesses, when there's an audience. And I think it would help our species to mature, if I can use that word for a whole species, if we discovered that, yes, we had neighbors and we're talking to them. Now that presents major challenges, but there are some very interesting mathematical efforts, which I can barely understand, to do things like send the periodic table and send measures of time, et cetera. Send the beginnings of what eventually will be a common language. We hope. After all, we don't know what the extraterrestrials will be. But there's a lot to be said about what they could be. There's an assumption, for instance, at least among astronomers, that they're much older than we are. We're in a relatively young area of the galaxy, and therefore they must be smarter and they must be wiser. And one of the things that I have to get around to publishing is why, no, not necessarily. Look, if you look at our own technology, most of us don't have a clue about it. If you're in a plane, how many passengers understand Bernoulli's principle, which is what makes those wings work? Our advances are a very small number of very bright people in combination with a social structure that actually, instead of burning these people at the stake for at least this period of history, I'm not sure how much longer, gives them some reward and some encouragement and permits the accumulation, thanks to good old capitalism, permits the accumulation of information. But our average intelligence could be much lower than it is, and we'd still have a high-tech society, so long as you got those occasional geniuses. So one of the things that I would not be surprised to find is that we make contact with extraterrestrials and they are idiots. And it's taken them 1 million years or more to get to where we are right now. Because only once every 1,000 years or so do they have one of these bright people. And it's very rare that those people are actually listened to for a little while. But we really don't know very much at all about what we can find, which makes sending messages really challenging, except that if they're going to be able to receive the message and interpret it, they're a high-tech society. High technology requires the cooperation of large numbers of people who are highly specialized. I mean, even in an airplane is, I don't know how many separate pieces it's made of, probably 1 million or more. So we're not going to find that, well, the extraterrestrial is just one very bright individual. What we're going to find, this is a social cooperative species, which suggests that it's likely to be like us, which is good because the messages that we send almost necessarily assume that there are a fair number of similarities. For instance, you're not going to have extraterrestrials, you probably won't anyway, who live in the water, because it's hard to see how you're going to be able to develop chemistry if you can't have fire. They're going to have some kind of appendages. But maybe they're going to be able to.
So I want to ask a question, because this is something that Neil deGrasse Tyson spoke about. He said, you know, it's very possible that aliens have been sending us messages, but maybe 5,000 years ago, and they assumed we had radios, or they assumed we had ways of communicating 5,000 years ago, which we didn't. So he said we may have missed an opportunity. And is that possible also? Are we reaching to people who are so far away that they're gone, already gone?
Well, I think the universe is simply too large and the number of planets too vast for us to really miss the opportunity. We may have to be patient again. And when we're trying to communicate with species, it's good to target a planet that we know is at least in the habitable zone. But in fact, there may be 100 planets that may eventually get the message. And maybe 10 of these are going to have high technology societies. We don't know. So I wouldn't worry even if we've missed it. That's okay. Those of us who have grandchildren, we may not make it, but maybe our grandchildren will get an answer.
Okay. So why don't you go on with some of the presentations you had? Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. Yeah. One of the things, though, why do we think we need to understand these unidentified aerial phenomena? Well, yeah, maybe they're a threat to our safety if our show that our enemies are more advanced to us. But one of the peculiar things about human nature, and our society in particular, is we demand explanations for everything. Other societies, you just shrug your shoulders and say, well, that's the will of the gods or a god, and they're more fatalistic. And you don't need to understand that. You don't need to understand everything that happens, but we do. That's us. So again, a lot of this uproar is telling us more about our particular culture than it is about what the phenomena are. Because frankly, we don't really have a clue about these phenomena, not judging from those 9 pages.
So I have a question. Why are people willing to accept that they're aliens, but they're not willing to accept that a COVID vaccine is not, is okay to take, or they believe that, that Bill Gates is putting microchips in us. But they will accept that they will accept aliens, which is, we have no proof of, but they won't listen to the other parts of the science. And as an anthropologist, what do you think accounts for that?
Well, here I'm an evolutionist, and
Okay.
that's the hat that I need to wear. And somebody who's been rather involved with evolutionary psychology.
Okay.
We seem to have evolved in terms of small groups, coalitions. And a lot of our psychology is coalitional psychology. Mm-hmm. We never evolved to, it must be truth. What we evolved to do is, I need to be a member of a group. I need to be a member of a group as powerful as possible. I need to be trusted by members of that group and to have them trust me. Now, what does that require? Many symbolic group markings, the way, your facial scarifications, or your facial features, or your accent, or your beliefs and the rituals you practice. And if you're one of us, then this is what you believe and you know to be true. When people talk about politicizing, say, public health measures, well, the modern internet has made it possible for us to have many subgroups, many coalitions, because individuals can communicate directly with one another or can get large numbers of followers. You can think of these as tribes, if you like. Once you belong to a tribe that believes that COVID vaccines are going to put horrible things into your system, and it's all a myth anyway, well, you're going to lose all of your friends and switch from comrade to enemy if you challenge this. So a fair number of people will say, I'm not going to challenge this. They may keep their mouth shut, or they may come to believe these or convince themselves that this is what's true. And one of the things that, to move away from politics, one of the ways in which you can be a group member and have allies, and even friends and people who support you, who share your feeling that we're the ones who really know and everybody else is really stupid. One of the ways to do this is we know the extraterrestrials landed and the government is just covering it up for various reasons. Okay. No problem with that, because we did not evolve for truth. I remember writing many a year ago that language didn't actually evolve to convey truth. Language evolved so that you can influence the behavior of others toward you. And one of the ways of influencing them is to get them to accept you as a member of the group. So unfortunately, people like me argue that we're primarily adapted to small-scale hunting-gathering groups, small-scale bands, not even tribes. And we're now in an environment insanely distant from what we evolved in. It's remarkable that we're able to do as much as we can do, but we're filled with of evolutionarily inappropriate behaviors that really are not adaptive at all, but the evolved psychological mechanisms that underlie them were, even just a few thousand years ago, and certainly 10,000 years ago, were indeed adaptive. So that's the way we work.
So you've written about spirit, you've witnessed spirit possessions in Africa. And you said that if you didn't really know what was happening, you may not, if I had gone, or in your case, when you went, you said you wouldn't necessarily know what was going on. But the people in the village all knew what was going on.
And that's because that was a society that was pretty much unicultural. I mean, there was certainly conflict between those adhering to aspects of the traditional religion, which would include Buddhi, the spirit possession, and the dominant Islam, is a heavily Islamic region. But even the Islamists didn't think that the spirits were false. They just thought that it's bad to worship them. You should be worshiping Allah and following our practices. Now, we're a vastly larger and vastly more complex and vastly more electronic society. So we seem to have space now for all sorts of beliefs, so coalition, call them coalitions, call them bands, call them tribes. But it's really scary. The thing that has kept the United States together used to be shared beliefs about the way government should operate, the way voting should operate. And this is off topic now, but as we all know, there are certainly challenges to these beliefs that apparently are no longer well shared.
So I know that Elon Musk and people like Stephen Hawking, they felt we shouldn't be looking for aliens. They said that let's not raise let them know we're here, because they may come and destroy us. What is METI's view on that?
Well, again, I can't speak for METI as a whole. I can speak for myself. Okay. And quite a few years ago, though, in one of the many books edited by Doug Vakach, who was the president of METI, I did a chapter in which I argued that, yes, it's possible that extraterrestrials could be hostile, could be dangerous. The way that I sort of work in thinking about extraterrestrial psychology is, okay, let's take what we think we know about how human intelligence and social cooperation and culture evolved. Let's make a slight change in that scenario. And what kind of psychology do we wind up with? And here, well, we're pretty confident now that we evolved in terms of highly social, highly cooperative individuals, readily forming into bands, competing with one another, with males and females, selecting as mates the individuals with the most intelligence and the most ability to cooperate and to communicate. The competing bands means that we were culling one another, but the people who were culled out were the people who were least cultural, least intelligent, least good at learning from those around them, and so on. Suppose, however, that those bands were not our own species. Suppose we have a scenario where we have a number of different species, maybe originally related, but no longer closely related, and we were culling one another. And the extraterrestrials we're communicating with got to have their culture because they were best at killing people who were different from them. You could argue that in that case, maybe you've got a species that are obligate xenophobes, really hostile toward anybody else. They might even be searching the cosmos for enemies to kill. That's the only reason that they would have for looking for them, well, alien species. This is possible. It's just wildly unlikely. And you have to make so many assumptions. First, that you could have a species develop intelligence like this, rather than everybody wiping everybody else out. They'd have to develop technology. We've only done that very recently, and we're not sure how long we're going to remain a high technological species. And then they're going to be so motivated by hostility toward creatures that they have no idea whether there are any such things, that they will put a lot of their wealth and their effort into hunting them out. And they're going to be so advanced that they can project devastating damage over many light years. This possibility does not keep me up at night. Destroying our environment, that can keep me up at night, yeah.
Okay, so I have two audience questions and that were sent in advance. And if people listening in, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. So the first question is, if you're looking at this issue through an anthropologist lens, why are the images we make of aliens either slimy, lizard-like monsters with menacing teeth, or big-headed, big-eyed creatures with long, rubbery arms? Are those cultural images of nightmares? Where do they come from? Also, are we not better off with something that remains as unseen as monsters? Yeah, so anyway, so the images like ET or whatever that we see, or the movies where these things come out to destroy us in the forms of lizards, where these are created by us, correct?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But there's a nice literature on why we like horror films. Okay. We like to be scared. Okay. We enjoy being scared. It focuses our attention. Our hearts start to beat faster. We pay attention. We learn rapidly if there's a threat, if there's a danger. And right, let's go back to the era of smilodons, saber-toothed tigers. This is pretty adaptive. Pretty adaptive to think that, well, that snake might be poisonous. You keep away from it. That animal might be dangerous. And because it's rewarding, not that it makes us happy, but somehow the satisfaction in being frightened, we go out of our way to frighten ourselves and to frighten one another. So we get horror flicks. And when we're going to talk about extraterrestrials, well, here's a blank canvas. Now, what horror story are we going to paint? And if you can do a good job painting, get me to Hollywood. You can make some money.
Okay, so someone asked, are you aware of the artist Bud Hopkins' books about alien abductions? And if so, your thoughts.
I didn't quite catch that.
Are you aware of the artist Bud Hopkins' books about alien abductions?
No, I'm afraid
Okay.
I haven't had the pleasure. Actually, that would be the thing that I would try not to read, and that METI is allergic to, because the last thing we want to be is associated with people with alien abduction stories, when what we're doing, we'd like to think of as science.
Well, I once read someone saying that alien abduction is mostly a Western phenomenon. You don't find it in Japanese or Chinese cultures. And he said, unless aliens are completely interested in, the Western world, there must be some other explanation.
Well, it could be that alien abduction is our equivalent of house of spirit possession.
Okay. But for the people who see a spirit possession, it's very real to them.
Yeah, and for the people who believe they've been abducted, this really happened to them. And the last thing I would do is to want to insult their beliefs. This is real to them. This is their lived reality. But if we're going to be doing science, there's really no evidence that there have been alien abductions.
Carl Sagan once said, if all these people, who've been said they've been abducted, how come no one's brought back an ashtray? No one's brought back a, alien cigarette? Nothing, he said. So that was his view. Here's another question. Is it the height of arrogance or ignorance to think we are the only beings in this great big universe? And also, when do you think a first contact will take place? I know you're not a prophet.
Okay.
So, okay.
Well, the height of arrogance, definitely. If we could develop intelligence, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of planets out there, not billions of planets out there, there certainly has to be plenty of technological intelligence there. Whether it overlaps with us, that overlap problem, I don't know. Whether it's in a reasonable distance or not. One of the things we were just talking about at our board meeting was the need to develop archives of messages we send, including how they were encoded and how to decode messages back to us and preserve them so that even if several centuries have passed, we'll be able to respond. So yeah, I think it's very arrogant. It's just that it's such a huge universe that you have to be a long-term thinker to get into METI. And I feel perfectly at home with METI. And on a personal note, this year in our little family woodlot, I planted 8 mulberry trees that I started from seed and stratified and put in there. I'm not a young man. I'm not going to be around to see them bearing berries. That doesn't matter. As I said, I have grandchildren. But you need to take that kind of long-term view to want to get involved with messaging extraterrestrial intelligence.
Someone wrote, I thought that there were artifacts recovered from people's bodies, such as tiny bits of mysterious metal that could not be fully analyzed. Also, what about, for example, Betty Hill's dress and the pink substance on it, analyzed to be organic, but of unknown origin? That's a new one for me.
I'm afraid I have no expertise here, so
okay.
I won't dismiss it out of hand, but I suspect if we looked and we discovered that somebody had seriously tried to analyze it, it wouldn't be a mystery anymore.
So, so in the Pentagon report, they don't talk about unidentified flying objects at all. They call them UAPs, to make them seem like it's, it's very different, and kind of dismiss it, just saying, well, these are what pilots have seen. We don't know what they are, and we just need to study this further. Unidentified aerial phenomenon. And they said a little amount of high quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomenon hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent of them. What kind of what kind of things do we need to see to really make, better conclusions?
Well, have you followed Barry Loeb and his book on extraterrestrial intelligence? And I think just last week, his announcements about his Galileo project. And Barry Loeb was the former chair of Harvard University's astronomy department, is quite an eminent scholar. And he wrote a book that came out last year, I guess. Anyway, it's called Extraterrestrials. And he argues that Oumuamua, the weird-shaped interstellar asteroid, was quite likely sent deliberately to us by intelligences. It passed through our solar system, so it is indeed interstellar. But he thinks that wasn't just a fluke, that quite likely was done deliberately. And just last week, he announced the Galileo project. So that 4 millionaires had come to him. He did not go to them, offering him funding for a project. And this project has 3 goals, but the one that answers your question in terms of what would convince people, he hopes to be seeing if the extraterrestrials who may have visited us left small satellites sending out reports back to them. And he has a program there, again, he gets sufficient funding to find these small satellites. Now, if he does, and we look at these and we say, no, this technology is not known to us, okay, well, I'd be convinced.
And who is funding this project?
He does not give, he's not released the names of the individuals. These are very wealthy people, obviously. He wants to do other things, some of which is other people have argued has already taken place. He wants to develop a network of powerful satellites, telescopes, that as soon as someone has an experience with these unidentified aerial phenomena, a very powerful telescope can immediately be focused in that spot, pictures taken so we can get more information. That's a good start. I look though, and I wonder, maybe the problem isn't well, maybe it is with the science. Look, not many generations back, most of the technology we take for granted would have been considered magic and impossible. Maybe what we're seeing now is simply a reflection of our ignorance. So maybe it's going to turn out that, I don't know, some of the science fiction writers guessed right, and there are indeed parallel universes, and this is some phenomena sneaking past the barriers. Maybe there's multiple dimensions, the very small dimensions that physicists talk about. Maybe if we fully understood them, we'd understand what these phenomena are. So I'm not optimistic that we're really going to understand what's going on over here, and I'm not too troubled by it. Nobody made us a promise that we were going to succeed in understanding everything. Life would be boring if we did.
Well, I remember a Twilight Zone where all the human beings on Earth were actually in a little globe, and there was people watching us and manipulating it. And that's actually a very popular, years later, I realized that's a very popular theory among some physicists, that we are in a artificial universe. So here's a question. Do you agree that aliens helped teach the Egyptians how to build the pyramids?
No, because the archaeologists have done a very good job in figuring out how you could shape and move that kind of stone and what kind of inclines it would take. It means that, hey, those people back, 5,000 and 6,000 years ago were really smart, or at least they had some geniuses there. And these geniuses figured out how to build pyramids. So I don't really see, you don't need to invoke extraterrestrials or aliens to build pyramids.
Okay. So in terms of messaging extraterrestrials, I mean, I remember years ago they built a little like time thing, and they had a Beatles album in it, and they had a paper or something. They had like some things that they thought aliens would be interested in, or show our greatest. It was like a little time capsule.
Yeah.
And so what is the messaging that METI is doing? I mean, what are these messages?
Well, that's a very difficult question, because METI responds to a number of different audiences.
Okay.
And I'm also on the message committee, and one of the members has done some interesting work asking people, surveys, what they would like to see asked. And one of the most common responses, I think the single most common response, was, help us. Please help us. And I think that would be a rather bad way to start a relationship.
Okay.
But more serious work is, I shouldn't say more serious, because that is serious. We could use the help, but how do we measure time? How do we tell them what length of time it took to do various things, how much time, and therefore how far away we are? How do we find a common ground? You can translate the periodic table into numbers. Now you have to then get the concept of numbers out and what, to what base are you going to do it. But there's quite advanced mathematical work on how you can do messaging. It's not complete in terms of, well, this is going to give us, we can send Shakespeare out, but at least it can give us some basis that we can start communicating. This, of course, assumes that, again, extraterrestrials are technological, and therefore they must have mathematics. Can you get technology without advanced mathematics?
Is mathematics considered a universal language?
Well, mathematicians certainly believe that mathematics is universal, and philosophers argue about this. Is mathematics simply a cultural construct, or is it the way that the universe works? And that's why our technology is so successful.
Okay. So here's another question. If it becomes clear that there is intelligent life on another planet, do you anticipate a spiritual crisis on Earth, given that discovery would undermine the religious beliefs of hundreds of millions of people? I know the current Pope has said he would baptize an alien. So,
and that's exactly what he should have said, and that's exactly what would happen. If you can already believe in some kind of an omnipotent, omniscient being, if you already believe in a long history of miracles, then surely you can make the minor adjustments that this omniscient, omnipotent being created many other Earths or Earth-like planets and many other species. You certainly, if you're a believer, you certainly don't give up your belief just because someone discovers that extraterrestrials exist. That would be crazy.
I asked a clergyman, what would it be like, if we discovered aliens? He said, there are aliens. He said, we call them angels. So I thought that was a clever, response, but
Yes, I'm not sure that the Pope would like that, however.
okay. And so someone also wants to know, how do we know that they want to communicate with us? Well, I guess that's an assumption.
Well, maybe the answer to Fermi's paradox, the answer to why we don't see extraterrestrials every day, is that mostly they don't want to communicate with us. It may turn out, for instance, that using optical light and using radio frequencies is something that they haven't done for hundreds of thousands of years. And that once we understand quantum communication, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but people talk about it. That's the way that they've been communicating or trying to communicate. And we haven't twigged on it all because we're still backward. But we keep on assuming that these are biological beings and they may have been created by biological beings, but maybe these are artificial intelligences. And we are unutterably boring to them or no interest at all in us. Who knows? It's a vast universe, though. And I think that there are probably species that will communicate with us if we're just patient and we keep on trying.
So your backdrop is Mars. That was taken by the rover, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't assume that we're going to find any life on Mars, but we do. But it's the I guess the most similar to us. So
similar, and it's close, and maybe the moons of Saturn will turn out to have life somewhere in there. But there's a big difference between looking for life and looking for intelligent life. Looking for life, and for Mars, it's unlikely there's anything alive now, but there could have been, and that's what we're looking for. If even in relatively inhospitable places, we find evidence for any kind of life, single-celled organisms, that greatly increases the likelihood that among the vast number of planets that are in the habitable zones of their stars, there's going to be life, and in some cases, life will have evolved, and in some cases, very rarely, but still, we're dealing with an N of hundreds of millions. In some cases, they may be intelligent creatures that would enjoy talking to us.
So what do you think of the people who say we should build colonies in space because the Earth is being destroyed by climate change, and build a new world on Mars or anything like that?
Well, Elon Musk, of course, is the one who wants us to go to Mars as a temporary refuge, so that after we've pretty much wiped ourselves out, we can rebuild with the help of the people who took refuge on Mars and have our technology and such. That sounds very interesting. I live in Nova Scotia, which is basically a peninsula, the ocean always nearby. Why not put a colony or refuge on the continental shelf? It'd cost a fraction of what it costs to get to Mars. Air, just put up your tube and you've got air, and you're pretty well protected from most things. So, but on the other hand, living in space now, that's the enormous advantages there are that space is full of minerals. And within another 20 years, it may seem absurd to destroy our planet by digging up every kind of mineral in the world, when we can send maybe people to the asteroid belt and have them find asteroids with valuable minerals and have techniques to mine them. But of course, I'm realizing as I'm saying this that, well, why do you need the people? Space is a really inhospitable environment. So there are already companies getting set up to explore asteroids. I mean, this is something you can already invest in. Why you don't really need people. I mean, we're taking asteroid samples back. Now it's tiny quantities, but give us another 10, 20 years. And I imagine the idea of mining for gold on Earth with all the damage that does to the environment, we could break apart a number of asteroids and find gold. Okay, I've gotten off track. Should we be living in space?
Okay.
I think the only reason to try to have a colony living in space is if you want to have a generation vessel. If you want people to go off to other planets, especially if we get evidence that other planets might well be livable for us, with at least some, maybe with some terraforming, then it makes sense to develop colonies, to learn how to spin an asteroid so you get enough centrifugal force. It can replace gravity, and we can live, we can even have babies there, and then maybe we can get a self-sustaining asteroid colony that is going to take 300 years to get to Proxima Centauri. Now, if I had billions to spend, I think that's where I would put my money rather than a colony on Mars.
So I'm going to wrap up. Someone wrote about the Drake equation, but that's really not, I can't really confirm you to a website, which doesn't really help people. So what's your message to people who say, I really hope we see an alien in the next 10 years?
Well, I hope so too.
Okay.
But life is only a snapshot. Think in terms of geological time. And be patient. So far, the only thing we've been good at is speeding up the destruction of the Earth. Let's worry about keeping the Earth a safe place to live while we wait to hear from extraterrestrials, or even if we decide that we want a generation ship to go out there, that's going to take centuries. So let's pay attention to keeping our own Earth clean and habitable.
Okay. So before you go, I want to say next Tuesday, by popular demand, I'm bringing back Dr. John Moore at Weill Cornell, and he's going to discuss anything you want to know about the Delta variant. And we're also going to discuss booster shots for COVID-19, because I already know some people who are getting them, which is illegal in the United States. And we're also going to, and then October 19th, we're going to discuss how other countries are using social media to actually give people positive information and true information about COVID-19 as opposed to what's happening in the United States. So I want to thank Dr. Barkow for agreeing to tell us about what METI does, and also giving us his insights into the, as a social psychologist and anthropologist, about aliens and what we can expect, and also about the work of METI. So I appreciate it very much, you spending some time with us. And everyone out there, stay safe. And again, next Tuesday, I'll be talking about, with Dr. John Moore, about the Delta variant. Okay, thank you everyone for tuning in, and stay safe.
Thank you very much, David, for being patient as I rambled on.
Oh, my pleasure. You were great. Okay, take care.